Why is it so hard to be vulnerable? It all goes back to middle school, okay? It all goes back to middle school and that time that you wore that new hat and you were so excited to wear that new hat, and then all your little mean girl friends started making fun of you and whispering about how stupid your hat was, and then you decided that you weren't going to wear that hat anymore and it was too embarrassing, you weren't going to express yourself ever again. And oh, is that just me? Oh. Welcome to Wellness with Michelle. Last week I talked about perfectionism and y'all saw me get vulnerable. I don't want to talk about it. That was fine. Okay, so today we're talking about vulnerability.
The quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally.
When I used to think of vulnerability, the first thing that would kind of come up in my head was Spider-Man and kryptonite. When Spider-Man, Superman and kryptonite. When Superman would be about... Can't believe I said Spider-Man. When Superman would be around kryptonite, he would be vulnerable because he was no longer invincible. It was like, now he's weak, now he can be attacked, you know? But we're not talking about that type of vulnerability today. We're talking about emotional vulnerability. And contrary to popular belief, emotional vulnerability is not a weakness. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable is actually one of the most courageous things that you can do, because it's in our human nature to avoid pain, avoid conflict, avoid anything that can make us uncomfortable. And vulnerability is uncomfortable. Brene Brown, who has a very famous TED Talk about vulnerability, and this is a topic that it's her entire career revolves around researching this topic. She defines vulnerability as uncertainty, emotional exposure, and risk. When you're vulnerable, that's literally it. You are uncertain. You're living in a state of uncertainty. And that's why it's possible for you to get hurt, because you just don't know what's going to happen, but it's usually for a greater reason. So I'm going to speak specifically to creatives because that's my experience and that's just my area of expertise. Artists are people who are typically vulnerable in their work. And there's different types of art out there, and I don't believe necessarily that every work of art is a work of vulnerability, because there's a lot of music out there where people are completely masked up, you know? For example, there's a lot of music about not giving a and being tough and not catching feelings and blah, blah, blah. So while not all works of art are examples of vulnerability, I do think that maybe I'm biased here, but I think that artists are one of the most vulnerable types of people on earth, or at least we're the only ones that always kind of have to bring vulnerability to our work. And I say this because I don't want someone's fear of being seen to ever get in their way of creating their art. Being on stage or publishing your work on the internet, you know, those are really scary things, because there are people like comedians who get booed on stage, or even like singers who get booed on stage, and content creators who, you know, they're putting their recipes, they're putting their paintings, they're singing out on the internet, and there are people who will just hate for the sake of hating. Like, if you are in the audience booing, or if you are in a comment section, you know, criticizing somebody's work, or just straight up being mean from an anonymous profile, or if it doesn't even matter if your face and name is part of your username where you're bullying people from, you are criticizing someone who is being courageous and putting themselves out there. And the irony is that you don't even have the courage to do that, yet you're sitting in the back of the theater or in the back of your phone hating. Why couldn't I think of the word? Hating. So if you are a creative, don't be afraid of those people putting you down, because those people are not even brave enough to put themselves out there the way you are, so that those are not even opinions that you need, okay? We're going to brush those people to the side. Anyway, what I was trying to say was that putting yourself out there, whether it's on a stage or on a virtual platform, is a form of vulnerability, because as we know, we've seen those cooking videos where there's a bunch of hate comments. People are talking about, why did you season it that way? Or why are you cooking it that way? That's gross. To people who are just expressing themselves or trying to help others feed themselves. There's especially vulnerability in learning something new. And this isn't just for creatives. This is like for everybody. When you're learning a new skill, sometimes you have to do that in front of other people, and it can be embarrassing. Like, let's say you're taking a dance class and you're not that great of a dancer. Like, if you keep practicing, you're gonna get to that level where you're like, you got those moves and people envy you, and you are the one who looks cool moving your body the way other people wish that they did. When in the beginning, maybe you don't have that skill or that talent. Maybe it doesn't come naturally to you. I had to take, not had to, but I took singing lessons a couple of years ago, and I remember I'm not somebody who's a natural born singer. So I felt very vulnerable when I was in my singing lessons because it was in a music school. Hey, Christian. It was in a music school, and I remember sometimes thinking, like, how thin are these walls? Can everybody hear me out here? Like, like my voice cracking and everything, but I had to do it in order to get better, right? And I had to practice at home too in between my lessons, and I remember always trying to practice my singing when there was nobody home, and I lived with like 4 people, so that wasn't always easy. But sometimes I just had to sing my heart out and do my little vocal warm-ups, the and all these silly like la 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 la, all that crazy shit. I would have to do that at home with other people listening to me, and I was not comfortable with it, but I knew that I had to do it in order to sound like Jennifer Hudson one day. What I'm trying to say is you gotta get comfortable in that discomfort, because that's how you're gonna grow, and that's how you're gonna end up being in that place where you want to be, is by living in that discomfort, accepting it, embracing yourself for who you are, and not letting the idea of other people's opinions knock you down or stop you from practicing your crafts or trying or putting yourself out there. Because one day there will be people who appreciate your work and are so happy that you got through that amateur phase, or even just kept doing the things you do because your work can speak to them, or you can inspire them to either pursue their own goals, or I don't know, you can inspire someone to be a dancer because you're such a good dancer. You can inspire someone to make a new meal for their family because the recipe that you showed them how to make in your video looks so good. Why is it so hard to be vulnerable? It all goes back to middle school. Hold up, we saw this part already. Whispering about how stupid your hat was. As we grow in this society, right? Because when you're kids, when you're a child, you don't really have inhibitions, and you're not really that easily embarrassed. But as you get older, you see it, right? You see when like children are little and they're dancing at the family parties, and then they grow up and all of a sudden they don't want to dance anymore. They want to sit on the couch, and you try to pull them to dance and they're like, no, because they've learned how to be embarrassed. And why is that? Because society teaches us to be ashamed of who we are. Hurt people. We've all dealt with someone in your life putting you down. And I don't know how old you are watching this channel, but what we have to learn how to do as adults is to shed those layers of shame and put those walls down, and allow ourselves to be seen. Because the worst thing that can happen is that people who shouldn't be in your life anyway don't like you anymore because you're showing your true self. So I say, if you have a dream and you have to put yourself in a vulnerable position to accomplish it, it's going to be 100% worth it, because you're going to be living in your utmost truth, and you're going to be attracting people who are also living in their truth, and you're going to be surrounded by people whose hearts reflect yours. Damn, that was deep. Rare, raw, real.